And then I'll open it up for public comment, but it doesn't appear like we have any members of the public here tonight. Moving on from that, we can go in.
Have any requests for public comment separately?
Pam told me she was going to be here, but she's not here yet. She didn't sign up beforehand, I don't think so.
Shows up, we can backtrack.
Sure, exactly. Shows up, we can backtrack. From here, we can move on to our discussion topics. Our first one is Safer Streets of Littleton.
Hi all. Let's see. Let me share my screen. Okay. So my name is Kenna Davis. I'm a transportation planner within Public Works for the city. And I am one of the team members that's helping lead the Safer Streets Littleton initiative. We presented at City Council recently, and so this presentation is an altered version of that. So if you want to listen to the whole presentation, it's online. You're welcome to hear the discussion with council members. So today I will talk a little bit about our program overview, in terms of like all of Public Works and my transportation group that I'm a part of specifically, and then talk about the different initiatives as part of Safer Streets Littleton, and then talk about the Transportation Mobility Board as well. So our program overview. So one thing that we just try to talk about whenever we're talking about planning, engineering, construction is that we try to take a holistic approach. So, pre the Safer Streets Littleton initiative, we've always tried to take this holistic approach where we look at every project and see what opportunities are there for bicycle and pedestrian improvements, even if that's maybe not the main focus of the project. So Santa Fe and Mineral Quadrant Road project, for an example, and I don't know a ton of details about that. That's an Aaron Human project, my supervisor. But as part of that project and as part of the new developments within the Santa Fe and Mineral area, we looked at, hey, what other improvements can occur with the Quadrant Road? And so what we are going to eventually have once it's fully constructed is a nice wide sidewalk for pedestrians, as well as a two-way cycle track. So a two-way bicycle facility that's behind the curb. So you're not on street level, you're up at the sidewalk level. There will be a buffer between the cycle track and the sidewalk. But that's just an example of looking at, the Quadrant Road project's main aim was to address congestion and queuing at the intersection, but we said, hey, let's try to add some multimodal improvements as part of that. So our project implementation process includes planning, and so I'm a planner. We have two other transportation planners on our staff within our group. Design, we have, that's more of the engineering part of it. So planning comes first, then design, then construction, and then maintenance. And so that's really where our traffic operations crew and our streets crew comes in, of how do we actually maintain these facilities to make sure it's, clear for people to use, it's plowed in the winter, there's not, pieces of concrete or asphalt, that it's an actual facility that people can use. Some of our overarching elements include funding. It always comes back to funding, it feels like. Equipment, so that's one of the things that we'll talk about here is in order to do some protected bike lanes, which means that there's a barrier between the bicycle facility, the bike lane, and the travel lane. We need to have specialized equipment in order to plow and sweep that, because a normal plow typically will not fit within that channelized space of a bike lane. And so, and then staff constraints as well. So, as we're adding more protected bicycle facilities, who's actually operating these plows and sweeps? Needing to look at staffing as well, and who's implementing these, who's designing them, all of that. Hi, just for you, I'm Kenna Davis. I'm a transportation planner, and we'll be talking about the Safer Streets. No, you're good. We just started, so. And then one thing we wanted to mention too is that while we utilize in-house expertise, we also utilize consultants as well. And then we obviously manage those consultants on projects. So some of our 2024 pedestrian and bicycle safety goals. So we want to continue to drive forward our existing projects. So I guess let me back up a second. How many of you know where the impetus for the Safer Streets Littleton initiative came from? I realize I dove straight in and I might have missed some important background information. Okay, I will give some background. So back in last fall, we tragically had a middle schooler riding his bike to school who was hit and killed. And that really spurred city council and us as staff to create the Safer Streets Littleton initiative of how can we accelerate some bicycle and pedestrian projects and try to make it safer for everyone, regardless of what mode of transportation they're using throughout the city. So with that, we already had our existing projects planned for the year, and most of the projects that my group deals with are grant funded. And so this means we got these grants back in 2020, 2021, and we're now either in planning, design, or construction for them. And so we didn't want to risk pausing these projects because grant projects have specific deadlines that you have to meet in order to receive the funding. So all of this work is on top of our kind of existing planned project work plan for the year. We have been installing pilot projects for the last couple of years, and as you'll see, we're increasing the number of pilot projects we're doing. And so pilots are really a way for us to look at what areas in the city are we hearing feedback from, either through our neighborhood traffic calming program or just through resident complaints, emails, talking to you, whether it's at a meet greet me or, on the street. And then to really expand the amount of pilots that we're doing. So we're doing way more this year than we did last year. Last year we did about 10. This year, depending on how you slice the cake, it's about 38 projects. So we're increasing that. We really wanted to work on an enhanced communication strategy. And so one of the things we've realized that we could improve upon is that we're doing a lot of work, but no one knows about it. And so what benefit does that bring? Strengthen the police role in both education of, how to be a safe person traveling in the city, regardless of what mode, and then also increasing enforcement. Adding personnel and equipment to increase our capacity, and then to look forward into 2025 and beyond of how can we continue these improvements. One thing I just wanted to mention is that we do collaborate with lots of different partners. So, internal, external collaboration, both within my group, within Public Works and our capital improvements team, and our traffic operations crew who's out of the Bellevue Service Center, the city manager's office, police. And then we also have a traffic safety committee that meets bi-weekly. And so that is a multidisciplinary group that includes city manager's office, police, communications, Public Works. And that's where we really discuss a lot of our resident requests, any major crashes that might have happened, and then just other ongoing safety conversations. So a lot of times police will come in and say, hey, we've been hearing a lot about this location. Can you look up, is there any crash data? Is there any speeding there? Or vice versa, we'll say, hey, we've been getting a lot of complaints at this one location. Can police do some more targeted enforcement there? And then our bicycle and pedestrian safety campaign is working with social media to disperse that out between both the city social media, police social media, and Littleton Public Schools. And then we also work with different advocacy groups, CDOT, Littleton Public Schools, South Suburban Parks and Rec. We work with lots of different partners on many of our projects. I won't go into super detail. This is very into the weeds, but basically when we first went to council after Liam's death last October and kind of presented, hey, here's what we're doing, here's some ideas. We went back in February and that's where we presented our whole Safer Streets Initiative suite of projects. And from that February meeting, they identified $2.3 million for us to implement this, both this year and then most of the stuff is happening this year. Some of these, like the school zone adjustments and pilot project permanent installations, that will bleed into next year as well. But the majority of this we're trying to accomplish within 2024. So again, I won't belabor the budget, and we'll talk more about these individual items. Again, timeline, we're trying to accomplish most of this within 2024. So we really started a lot of these back in February, and then procuring some consultants and whatnot. And like, pilot projects is kind of an ongoing of, we have to design the pilot projects more in the winter and spring and then start to install them in the summer and fall. And then you go into evaluation where you're saying, hey, did this actually work? Did this lower speeds if that's what the goal of the pilot was? So into the actual actions. So quickly, as part of our request to city council is we felt like we were at capacity with our staffing levels, with all of our other grant funded projects. So we were able to add 2 more staff members to my group. So we have a new transportation planner and a new traffic engineer. And then communications also hired a new member of their team earlier this year, which allowed David Gilbert to spend more time with public works specifically, to help us with our communications campaign and getting the word out. Some future personnel requests, which goes kind of back to that maintenance operations aspect, is we need more members on our traffic operations crew. They're the ones that are installing all these pilot projects. They do help with plowing in the winter. They do all the striping, signage, etc. And then grounds operations as well, because they'll be helping with the plowing and sweeping too. So those are some future requests in 2025 and beyond. Our communication strategy, so this is really where David comes in. So we've been doing different articles in the Littleton Report online every 2 weeks and the printed Littleton Report. So hopefully you all read that and have seen some of these articles. This is just a list. So we've given an overview of what Safer Streets Littleton is, some more information about the increased enforcement. We'll be striping some new crosswalks, some of our evaluations that we're doing, pilot projects, etc. We also have an Around Town with Jim, when we talk about this initiative as well. And then we will be launching a pilot project feedback survey very soon in the next couple weeks. Police enforcement. So starting in February, they increased enforcement around schools. I will say this was, and without getting into too much of the weeds, this was a overtime opportunity. So take these numbers as you will, because this is not assigned shifts. These are shifts that police officers can take in their free time. But we did see that there was increased enforcement in school zones. So we had, as you can see here, a number of citations and warnings throughout the years. So again, some of these numbers you can say, oh, look, the enforcement has worked because citations have gone down. You have to remember that, well, maybe there was less shifts that police officers were doing with this enforcement. But we also have heard a lot from the community about illegal parking and bike lanes. And so police is also going to be doing a flyer campaign to warn drivers about that as well. One thing unfortunately with parking is that we currently have 1 parking attendant for the whole city. And so that just, there's limitations in how much enforcement we can do with parking across the city because of that, so. And then for education and safety campaign, so we are having a bike maintenance and safety event on July 20th at Pedal Bike Shop. So we're partnering with the bike shop, which is great. So, we're encouraging everyone to bring their bikes, and if there's any issues, you can actually, go into the shop and they can help you fix it right then and there. We're gonna have a bike course. We're gonna have some safety moments where we're teaching correct ways of how to ride a bike, and what to look out for, especially, when you're crossing traffic, that type of thing. We'll have some swag, and you should hopefully be seeing some social media about that. We're also working on a safety campaign and education with Littleton Public Schools. And so Littleton Public Schools is the one that's actually crafting this curriculum. And then they'll work with the SROs to actually teach this in the fall semester. And we're hoping that this can be like a reoccurring curriculum every year. And we're hoping to address, bikes, peds, and cars too, especially at the high school level when teenagers start to get licenses, so. All right, and then public works. So this is really where my group comes in, and you can see us, we're out here in the field in this photo, looking at pilot projects. So here's some examples. These are not from Littleton except for the pedestrian crossing improvement on the left. So this is an example. This is actually at Elodie and Lee Gulch, and we actually did this last year. So we look and I'll get a little more into this, but pedestrian crossing improvements, we call it bulb outs, bump outs, of just trying to make the crossing distance shorter for pedestrians. On a lot of our streets where you have bike lanes, it becomes a little interesting because you don't want to block the bike lane, so you have to take that into account. But we use a lot of this material that's called C-curb or tough curb, which I know many members of the public have thoughts about the aesthetics of that, but it's a really cheap and easy material to install for our crews. New school crosswalks, that's pretty self-explanatory, striping new crosswalks with school signage. And then protected bike lanes. This is just one example, and I'll get into this a little more on the next slide, but we have 4 different locations where we're going to be installing our first protected bike lanes, and we strategically wanted to choose different materials for each of those corridors. Because of the whole idea of a pilot is that we're testing out different materials. We want to see, hey, what is cost effective, what's easy for our crews to install and maintain. And then that's where the pilot project survey comes in, is what do residents like? And what really makes you feel the most comfortable riding your bike? So this is one example where it's, rubber parking stops and delineators. So this is our whole list of pilot projects. And I realize I'm missing one here around Euclid Middle School, a line here. But we have 8 trail mark parkway crossings. So this is just upgrading the crossings to be in compliance with our MUTCD manual uniform traffic code, which is kind of our guiding, federal document. Our trail connectivity study, so the Littleton Linkages Trail Study was completed back in April of this year, and that identified many different locations across the city of either upgraded trail crossings or new trails. And so these 4 rows to the top is kind of highest priority in the ranking. And so that's, some of these pedestrian crossing improvements we're doing at those 4 locations. School crosswalks, we're striping 20 new crosswalks around the schools identified here. Bike pilot projects, as I mentioned. So there's 4 protected bike corridors, and then Irving, we striped bike lanes last year and actually just got paved and striped with a buffered bike lane like just 2 weeks ago. And so we'll look at, potentially next year we can add protection to make it a protected bicycle facility. Euclid and Elati, we actually already have plans in the works of adding some raised pedestrian crossings there, and then looking at what some of our recommendations from some of these other evaluations that I'll touch on in a few slides for improvements along that corridor. And then those 2023 pilot enhancements. So again, the idea of pilot projects is that we're either testing new materials or we're trying to traffic calm with different ideas. And so we take data before, during, and after. So these 2023 pilots we looked at and said, hey, the big issue here was speeding. And so we were trying to calm traffic with the pilot. We didn't necessarily see the speeds that we were hoping to see. So we're coming back in, maybe adding some more elements to that pilot to see if we can bring down speeds even more. And then, like I mentioned, we will be having yard signs at each of the pilot projects, and then a survey online. That's supposed to be, it's really quick. It's just like, what's your location? What are your thoughts of this? Does it make you feel safer? Will you use this facility more? Are there any other thoughts you have? I'll take a break too. I realize I'm talking a lot at you. If you have any questions, please feel free to interrupt me. So we have 2 evaluations that are part of our overall initiative. So one is the school zone safety evaluation. So we hired Y2K, and they're a consulting firm that really specializes in safety and safe routes to school and kind of the intersection of those. And so we did lots of observations this spring before school got out. May was crazy. I think we were doing at least 2 or 3 observations each week. So we did observations at all 12 schools, both AM and PM, to see how pickup and drop off goes, to see, who's walking and biking and where are there certain, conflict points that we need to be aware of. And then for high school, we also looked at lunch because it's open campus at both Heritage and Littleton high schools. And so we wanted to see what the traffic patterns look like during lunch hours. The PM of that project, or project manager on the consultant side and the city side, met with all the school principals and school resource offices just to get their opinions and talk about issues they've seen. And then we had a school safety summit that we held on June 10th, which we had a great turnout. We had 10 of the 12 schools represented. And there, you know, it was a great time to come together and say, hey, this is what we saw, but what are we missing? What else, you know, maybe don't we have on our maps or anecdotally what you're seeing. And then from there, our consultant is putting together their recommendations. And so we're hoping to have those done in August 2024 so that we can actually go in and do some improvements before the fall semester starts. So this may include changing where the school flashers are. You know, there's new regulations out, right, all the time. And so, you know, are we following those regulations? Do we need to move them? What additional signage or crosswalks or crossing guards are needed at specific schools, those types of things. Did I miss one? No. All right, our corridor and design studies. So I guess I'll back up a bit. Our transportation master plan was the first city's transportation master plan, and that was published in 2019. And in that plan, we identified high injury network locations. And I realize this is getting very jargony in like the transportation realm. But from 2019 to 2023, we focused a lot of our projects on these high injury network locations, which are at many of our major intersections. So think Santa Fe and Mineral, Broadway and Littleton Boulevard, or Bowles and Federal. And so while not all of those improvements have been constructed yet, we have some level of projects at 12 of the 15 high injury network locations. Again, those are all along our major roadways. What our projects necessarily haven't captured is a lot of our internal, what we, in the industry call collector roadways, or in our TMP, we call them connectors. And those are a lot of the corridors identified here. So these are really those more internal neighborhood routes, how you're getting out of your neighborhood to go to a commercial center or downtown, or how you're getting to school or whatnot. So as part of the Safer Streets Littleton initiative, we realized, hey, we're addressing 12 of the 15 high injury network locations, which is great, but we're not addressing these connector routes that people use every single day to live their life. And a lot of times where, you're not necessarily biking on Santa Fe, right? I mean, you're biking on the Mary Carter Greenway if you're going that route, but how are you getting to and from your house from the Mary Carter Greenway? And so while we've had projects like the trail connectivity study that have touched on that, we haven't looked at each of these corridors holistically and comprehensively as a network. And we recognize that we need to. So we're actually applying to a federal grant. And I apologize that this presentation was originally for our June council presentations. Some of these dates need to be updated. They extended this deadline to July 17th. So we've had an extra month for this federal grant. But we're applying for this federal grant. We're asking for 2.6 million. It's an 80-20 split. So that means 2 million would be grant funded. 600,000 would be, I guess we're overmatching, city funded. And so this would include doing a planning level analysis of each of these 9 corridors and how they work as a network overall. We did request a letter of support from the city, which we were able to get. The thing with federal grants is that it's very loose on timelines when you'll hear from them. Because it's an election year, we're assuming we'll hear sooner rather than later, but so hopefully by the end of the year we'll hear. And if not, we already have a plan in action to look at what other federal grants can we get to pursue these projects.
Question I have, you said the deadline got moved to July 17th. Has the city already submitted their proposal?
No.
Okay.
Yeah. I wish they had told us sooner that they were extending the deadline. They told us like 3 days before the original deadline. So all the work had been done basically, but it's given us like a little more time to collect some letters of support. Cause that's a big thing, is that you try to get letters of support from, South Suburban, other agencies you work with, like South Suburban or Arapahoe County. We actually worked with the 2 senators and Jason Crow's office to get letters of support from our congressional offices as well, so knock on wood, fake wood, that we get this grant, because that always helps, so. The city, I've talked a lot about grant funding. A lot of our grant funding that we've done has either been more at the county level, so we have multiple grants through Arapahoe County Open Space, or at the regional level. So Denver Regional Council of Governments, they have a whole grant program called TIP funding, and this is getting so into the weeds of transportation jargon, so I apologize. So we have a lot of those level grants or grants from CDOT, like at the state level, but the city hasn't done too many of these direct federal funds with like USDOT, and so we applied for one last year that we were unsuccessful with, and then we're applying for this one this year, so fingers crossed we get it, because that's where a lot of big money is coming from, the USDOT. That you have to apply directly. It's not getting filtered down through the state and regional entities, so. Corridor and design studies. So specifically, we're looking at Euclid and Elati, and I mentioned that during the pilot project slide. So we're planning on going out and doing a pilot along Euclid and Elati. Elati from Ridge to Cayley, and then Euclid from Elati to Broadway. So the idea is that we're gonna go out and test what we think we wanna do out there with curb extensions, daylighting parking. That's a fancy term to say that we're moving parking away from crossings so that there's better sight distance, both from vehicles and pedestrians crossing, that you can see each other better. So the idea is that we're gonna go out and do a pilot this year, and then we're gonna take all the recommendations from our school zone safety evaluation and our traffic calming evaluation and the pilot project survey and determine what do we actually want to make permanent along these corridors. And then we already have funding to construct the portion of Euclid. Do not have funding yet for Elati, but we're working on it. So we're going to utilize our new on-call contract for that. So we're hoping to start this project probably late summer, early fall of this year. And as part of this too, which I didn't mention in this big corridor and design study slide, is that public engagement is a very big part of all of the projects that we do. So, we try to do surveys and open houses or virtual meetings or whatever it looks like on each project. So this corridor and design study for Euclid and Elati will be a great test run of what type of public engagement we do if we're awarded the federal grant for these 9 corridors. Because when we're talking about these 9 corridors and how to improve multimodal facilities, most of these areas have narrow sidewalks. It's like the 2-foot rollover curb, which as one person walking, it's like, okay, I have to walk in a single file. You can't roll, you have a stroller, you have to be in the street. If you have a wheelchair, forget it. So these projects would really be looking at how can we expand the sidewalk network? How do we add bicycle facilities? What does that look like? Places like Prince and Windermere and Elati right now have bicycle facilities, but they're not protected. So how do we create safe and comfortable facilities that anyone would feel comfortable riding on? You with your kid or your elderly parent, or if you're just not as comfortable on a bike, we want to make sure that we're designing and building facilities that everyone can use. But when we talk about that, there are right-of-way constraints, and most of these corridors that we've identified, a lot of them have lots of residential along them. So you start talking about taking away on-street parking, which can become contentious, and that's where that public engagement comes in of like, you have to start weighing your priorities for the street cross section and what are you willing to get rid of in order for added safety benefits. So we'll see what happens with these projects, but.
A question I have
Yeah.
for the corridor studies. I know you had mentioned this was 12 of the 15 most impacted areas, you said, right?
Not these, the other projects that we've done.
Okay.
Are the 12 of the 15 high entry network locations.
Then how were these streets decided? Cause some of them Mineral, I know they're doing a lot of development of the new Lumen building, and I was like, I'd be curious to see like if there's gonna be a traffic study there or anything in the future, or is this just for 2025, or is this, what is the, I guess the better question is, what is the time frame for these?
Totally, and I think two parts to your question. So one of the reasons that we've been able to address 12 of the 15 high injury network locations are because they're on our larger roadways, which Dr. Cog, Denver Regional Council of Governments, who does the big tip applications, which is, you know, where we can get a lot of our grant funding for. They usually do them in 4-year cycles. So like we just had one in 2022, so we won't see one for a couple years. In order for a project to qualify for a tip grant, it has to be on what they consider the regional roadway network. So that includes things like Santa Fe, Mineral, Broadway. Bowles is on there, but Littleton Boulevard is not. So for our idea was that we were trying to get Littleton Boulevard within the next regional transportation plan so that we could apply for future tip funding. So one answer to one of your questions is that these are not on that.
That makes sense.
So we decided, hey, we haven't been able to go after grant funding for these corridors. What other programs can we look at? So that's one. Two, when this originally started, I guess back up. These were all most of these corridors were identified in our transportation master plan as needing some sort of upgraded multimodal facility, whether it's a bike lane or protected bike lane and widened sidewalks. The majority of these were identified in the TMP already. So that's kind of our guiding document, right? We always want to go back to the TMP and see what did that plan say of what projects are needed across the city and how can we advance those. The third thing is that we also work with our capital improvement program team, and they do all of the road paving and maintenance. And so we also looked at, hey, what roads are within your 10-year pavement management plan? And how can we get ahead of that? We want to, you know, study these corridors, identify what improvements are needed, and then when you go and repave, we know exactly how we want to stripe it. We know if there's other concrete improvements that are needed along that roadway so that you're not tearing up a road that was just repaved. We always want to make sure that we're doing things once and we're doing it the right way. Does that answer your question?
Yes.
Perfect. The other evaluation that we are doing is a traffic calming evaluation. So with this, we really want to look at, hey, what is our existing traffic calming elements across the city? So like, here's a picture of one of our lovely traffic circles, right, that are along Elati and Gallup and some other roadways. This includes all of the pilot projects that we've been doing throughout the years with the C-curb and delineators. So we hired David Evans and Associates, or DEA. This project just started within the last month. So they're really in that kind of existing conditions inventory phase. We're going to do, a site visit in the next month to go out in the field and look at some of these elements. And then, you know, they're going to look at what are national best practices, what are surrounding jurisdictions doing. They're going to look at our existing neighborhood traffic calming program, which has different thresholds. To see, hey, are those thresholds consistent with what other jurisdictions are doing? Is that the best practice, or do we need to change up how we're evaluating resident requests? And so we're hoping that to be done in September, October timeframe for this project. Speaking of our neighborhood traffic calming program, so a little bit of history here. Back in 2023, we formalized this program. Before, it was informally, we talk about it at our traffic safety committee meetings, and we would just get emails from residents, or, you know, we talk to people and hear different complaints. But we formalized the program, so now it lives on the City of Littleton website. There's a form that you can fill out, and you can put in your exact location of where your issue is. You can select what the issue is, whether it's speeding or most of it's speeding, but, you know, sight distance, or, you know, there's just something wrong with this location that the city needs to look at. And so the way this program works is that you submit your request, we get notified, we look at it. We have a whole dashboard that we can pull up that shows all of the crashes from the last 5 years across the city, shows where other resident requests are, looks at the traffic volumes and any speeds we've taken. And then this year, we're utilizing a program called Urban SDK, which can look at, it uses big data, so like the GPS in your car, your phone, and aggregates data to show speed and volume citywide. Because one of the big bottlenecks we have is that we do annual counts with like the tube counters, you know, that's kind of classic way to count cars. You know, we do that at strategic locations annually. But that's just one piece of data at one point in time. We also have radar counters that my group will go and put out, which is really great because they're super flexible. We can put them on any pole, you won't even notice them, and we can take speed and volumes that way. And that's how we have been addressing resident requests through this program. But it takes a lot of staff time. I mean, you know, we have 6 counters. For us to be turning that over every 2 weeks, you know, that's a half day to a day of us going into the field, setting it up, you know, getting the ladder out, yada, yada, yada. So utilizing Urban SDK is gonna streamline that process where we can say, hey, is there a speeding problem here? And if the Urban SDK data is showing, hey, this is near the threshold that we have for our traffic calming program, which is about 10 miles per hour over the speed limit, then we can go out and put one of our radar counters up and see, hey, what's the actual data? Like, what's the truth data, right? But this is a way for us to kind of start processing these requests a little more frequently than what we're able to do previously. So we're working through these. So if you have submitted a request, I promise you we'll get to it. It's just slow moving right now, but with our new staff member, this is one of the projects she's actually taking on, so she's been a huge help. Speed feedback signs. And so, you know, these are the signs that will tell you your speed as you're driving along. We got 10 of these installed this year, specifically on corridors that we're hoping to do some of those corridor studies on. And the great thing about these signs is that they actually take speed and volume data as well. And so it's like a permanent counter in that location, which is great for us because we can really track that data over time, which is awesome. And so we have 4 more in storage, and I think we're gonna try to be replacing all of the existing speed feedback signs. So like think of Littleton Boulevard or the one on Powers right over here, so that they are this newer model that can take speed and volume data. And then transportation mobility board. So one of the things City Council also tasks us with is to have TMB start to look at Vision Zero. And I don't know how familiar you all are with Vision Zero, but it's a philosophy of how do we get to zero traffic fatalities and serious injuries. So currently the city does not have a Vision Zero policy. So I won't go through this. Just over the last 6 months, Shane and I, who are the staff liaisons for TMB, have just talked about different topics at each of those meetings. They're actually meeting tonight to talk about our presentation with City Council in August. So what is Vision Zero? It's a strategy to eliminate all traffic fatalities and severe injuries while increasing safe, healthy, equitable mobility for all. It was first implemented in Sweden in the 1990s. And it's grown across Europe and now in a lot of major American cities. So like Denver has a Vision Zero policy, Boulder has a Vision Zero policy. One thing we like to mention though is that Vision Zero is really a goal, right? It's not necessarily, you can call your program Vision Zero, but like that is the ultimate goal, is that we have zero traffic fatalities and serious injuries. The way that you implement Vision Zero, there's multiple different ways. And so FHWA, the Federal Highway Administration, has what they call a safe systems approach, which is like a 6-prong strategy of how to actually implement Vision Zero. Complete Streets is another tool within that. And so complete streets, we mean, you know, how can a street provide space for all modes or the identified mode of that street? So, you know, an ultimate complete street would have sidewalks and a protected bike lane and a travel lane for vehicles and a landscape buffer or whatever it is. And so our TMP talks about complete networks. We didn't get down to the level of complete streets, but that's something I think we will do in our next update. And then you know, the ultimate is to have like a safety action plan or vision zero action plan that identify strategic locations and actions to implement in order to achieve the Vision Zero goal. So we will be going to City Council August 13th with TMB, and they will be presenting their vision, or I guess their recommendation of, you know, what the city should do with Vision Zero, and how Littleton should approach it. So, and that is all I have. I guess any questions?
So, first thing that comes to mind, I wanna start by saying, like, I'm glad that the city is doing this. I support this effort generally. So I feel like a lot of times when there are tragedies within a community, people see their government as not taking action, and this is a tangible way of the government taking action to improve our city following something bad that happened here. I was gonna ask though, with like a lot of those corridors that exit the neighborhoods, you know, like Ridge or Windermere or you know, what have you, or Lowell, are there plans to, after a lot of these projects happen, make some things like bike lanes like standard design for streets within Littleton?
Totally, and yes, the answer is yes. You know, one of the projects that has been ongoing within Public Works that we're still trying to get across the finish line is called our Littleton Engineering and Design Standards. And that's really where you would see like a preferred cross-section for the different street types identified in our transportation master plan, where it would say, yeah, what is the ultimate preferred? And obviously, so much of what we do in a built out city like Littleton is that there are trade-offs, right? Talking about like the parking and whatnot. But yes, the idea is that we're getting to a place where that, you know, we want the most safe, comfortable, multimodal facilities implemented throughout the city. So it's gonna take a while to get there, unfortunately. You know, like with the corridor studies, hopefully we're successful with this federal grant. That just gets us to the planning phase. That doesn't get us across the line to 100% design or to construction funding, right? So there's still more work to be done, but it's the first step in a process. And then we can go and apply for other grants to try to get that design and construction funding. I think the other thing to mention too is that the TMP was published in 2019. When we published it, we were hoping to update it every 5 years. That would bring us to 2024. We're not updating it this year, and I'm not sure if we'll be updating it next year, but that's also where those things come to play. And I forget who mentioned Mineral, right? With all of the new developments along Mineral, and there's only so much you can make developers do, which can be frustrating, right? You know, you would love to be like, hey, Costco, can you build a nice protected bike lane across all of Mineral? But we unfortunately do not have the legal power to do that. We can make them do it in front of their property, which we are, making them expand the sidewalk and add a buffered bike lane with the hopes that eventually it'll be protected. I guess not the hopes, with the plan that it'll eventually be protected. I just lost my train of thought. Oh, but the TMP also includes like, you know, street types and preferred street design and preferred cross sections. And so I think as we go to update that in the next couple of years, that's also a place where we'll say, hey, let's like push the needle a little more of what we're saying must be required for developers. There's, you know, like the suggested and then the required and then all that fun.
Changing those requirements require action from city council as well?
You know, I think it would be more, they would be incorporated into the TMP and then the TMP is then adopted by city council. But I would imagine the TMB is very interested in the same topic, especially as, you know, large developers like Costco come in. And so I do believe we would spend quite a bit of time really looking at what those cross sections are and the street types and what the preferred facilities are on those, so. And as part of the TMP process, you know, we would be going to city council and I'm sure that would be something they would discuss. So they would have a hand in it, but maybe not like directly just for that part, but for the whole plan, if that makes sense.
Gotcha. And then the one last thing I wanted to ask is, so these pilot projects, I assume there's a place on the city website to look at all of them, okay?
Yes, yeah, we just launched a website that kind of includes a glossary too of what the different terms mean, cause not everyone knows what a curb extension or bulb out is or whatever. And then that's also where the survey will be located as well.
That's great. I just wanted to add, anecdotally, I live right over by the new, I guess like flex posts with the kind of plastic curbs that you put up at the intersection with it's the Lee Gulch Trail and Laddie Street. And just anecdotally, I feel like that's kind of slow traffic in that area, cause I walk and bike and drive through that intersection not infrequently. So I think it's good to see safety improvements like that around the city.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, it's interesting, I think we were really surprised last year when we took the data before and after some of our pilot projects, right? Cause Lottie was one that we did last year and then we added some more improvements this year. Whereas when I've driven through it and when, I've talked with people who use that crossing a lot, they're like, oh yeah, it seems like cars really slow down. But when we took the data during it, it only affected speeds maybe 1 or 2 miles per hour. And so that's why, Lottie and Lee Gulch specifically were like, what else can we potentially do to slow down cars? Cause I think there's something about the perceived safety and how you feel walking through it. And then there's like kind of the raw data numbers that are showing something different. And how do you deal with both of those, right?
Important to distinguish between the two.
Totally. So I think both are important points, right? That's like why we're doing the pilot project survey, because we want to know how people feel. And then we're taking more of that like hard data of what are speeds at this location. So
I personally have seen people run right over the plastic things multiple times. So I think there is a lot of the perceived safety that's almost more dangerous.
Right, because that's like the opposite of what we want to happen is that you feel safer in this crossing, but in reality, it's not changing people's behavior or speeds, right?
I do think like wider sidewalks, like what you were talking about, that you don't see people drive up onto the sidewalk often. And in Greenwood Village, they actually have, when you're going on like Franklin Street, they have a ditch that's filled with rocks between, and that seems to work really well. But the plastic ones.
And the plastic, is that just a part of the pilot program to just kind of test to see if it makes a difference, or is that gonna be, is that the plan for the permanent installation? Cause I know, like, when you're driving, I guess it'd be west on Berry and entering Bomar, which isn't a part of Littleton, I know, but they have the wood posts to protect bikers going for Goddard. And aesthetically, obviously, those are a little bit nicer, but like, if you were to hit that with a car, it'd dent your car, it wouldn't, yeah.
Yeah, no, it's definitely, I realize it's a fine balance between using materials that are more cost effective and easy to install, but also it's your neighborhood and it's the aesthetics and the functionality of them. So, the idea is that these are pilot projects, they're temporary, with like pedestrian crossing improvements around the 4 parks that we talked about earlier from the trail connectivity study. These 4 here, the idea is that eventually we would go and actually do these curb extensions in concrete. And get rid of, the temporary flex posts and C curb, and it would all be done in concrete. Some of these locations like Lottie and Lee Gulch, where there's a bike lane and a travel lane, you can't necessarily do the curb extension in the same way, and so we'd have to get a little more creative with what the permanent installation would be. Unfortunately, a lot of times funding just becomes an issue where we don't have funding to do the permanent installation. And while there is some funding identified in the Safer Streets initiative, it's not enough to do all of these locations. So while we don't imagine that, these pieces of C curb will be out in our community forever, they're probably going to be there for a couple of years at this point, as we're like evaluating and determining how to create more permanent installations.
That makes sense.
My other thought on it that I see, cause I live on Cayley and Spotswood, by a roundabout that has like the 4
Yeah.
corner
Things, yeah, whatever you wanna call them.
yeah, buffers or whatever, and then it also has 2 stop signs. And it's like overkill to where drivers are so confused by what they have to do. They have to stick their nose out really far to like get in the circle. When a roundabout typically doesn't have stop signs, so everyone's kind of like playing the chicken game.
Totally.
And same with like looking at some of the plastic posts when there's so many of them. And people are like,
Totally.
don't know what to do, and it creates more chaos.
Right, absolutely, and we are very aware of that, and I think that's where we're really excited to launch the survey to hear this type of feedback, because yeah, there is a point where like you are trying to create a safer situation and you can make it worse because of like the visual clutter, right? And so we are very aware of that, and I think, you know, the traffic calming evaluation that DEA is helping with is a lot of our like more permanent traffic calming installations, like the traffic circles, are 25 to 30 years old. And so while they're not necessarily at the end of their lifespan, so much has changed since the 90s when we installed them, especially in terms of like safety and how we think about multimodal users and just how we think about our transportation system. And so I think it'll be a really good way to have someone on the outside objectively look at these and say, you know, are these really working, or is it creating confusion with the different. And you know, it gets so into like the weeds of roundabouts and traffic circles and the sizes and stop control and like.
Parts of it are working, it's just all
Yeah.
of it together maybe.
Totally.
And like the crosswalks, especially with the blinking lights.
Yeah, the
I think
raised
those work
crosswalks.
great.
Yeah, I mean, I know if money was no object, I would love to put in like raised pedestrian crosswalks with the RRFBs, you know, the flashing lights at like all major trail crossings and at every school, but you know, I'm trying to remember the 3 raised ped crossings that we did downtown last year. I think those cost in total like $500,000. So our neighborhood traffic calming budget, I guess we put in a request for next year. We'll see what we get. Through this year, it's been 25K. So that, you know, that gets you only so much of these C curve things. And so as part of this is, you know, we're trying to push council like, hey, if this is a real initiative that we want to continue, let's not just put money towards it 1 year and say, okay, we're good. We got to continue this moving forward. And unfortunately, you know, in order to continue to do stuff, you have to put the money behind it, so.
Is there any like thing the city is doing to look into that financing aspect? Cause I know things are just getting more expensive year
Yeah.
over year and grants get more and more competitive.
Totally, and you know, grants are great. I mean, most of the projects my group does are grant funded, but they do make it more complicated. There's so many more regulations when you get grant funding involved, especially federal grant funding. Of just how, you know, how you have to do a lot of environmental stuff, which is great because of course we want to protect the environment, but it just does end up adding a lot of time and money to projects. I know the city is interested in potential debt financing. I'm not exactly sure where we're at with that, because, you know, Project Downtown only has so much identified funding that's not gonna, you know, construct the whole vision from that plan. And, you know, the Bellevue Service Center needs to be redone. And so, yeah, I know the city's looking at some alternative funding mechanisms, which I could imagine that, you know, some of this work could be rolled into that because, you know, 3A was passed in 2021 and I think we all had the highest of hopes, and that money can be spent time and time again with how much work could be done in the city. So it didn't solve all of our problems, unfortunately, especially when it comes to these, you know, major if, you know, we're talking about miles of corridor that, you know, just constructing sidewalk along that is millions of dollars, unfortunately. It's just crazy how much like concrete costs. And the minute you start talking about moving curb, you have to look at drainage. You have to look at utilities and like all these things under the ground that we don't necessarily think about either. So it gets more complicated and more expensive. But
How much money did you say is being put into these pilot programs and like temporary solutions, I guess?
yeah, so the overall Safer Streets Littleton initiative has $2.3 million, and that includes everything from like the personnel additions to new plows and street sweepers for the protected bike lanes. So for the pilot project specifically, we have in here 165,000. Our protected bike lanes, we're doing the procurement for those materials right now. Just the 4 protected bike lanes, I think we're at over 200,000. So, you know, but our budgets are, flexible, I would say, with this initiative. So I think all in all, we'll probably end up spending about 350,000 on pilot projects this year.
I guess my question would be, would it make sense, obviously you want to cover as much area as possible, but instead of doing temporary fixes everywhere or partial fixes that we're not sure are like the true solution, would it make sense to focus on a few main areas, specifically near the schools, and do them 100%?
Yeah. No, I mean, I think that's a really good question. I think this is kind of the path we're down this year, but I think looking to next year, that is a more of a philosophical, programmatic question that we need to ask ourselves of, is this the right way to be spending public taxpayer money on, a wide breadth of locations, or focusing it on some? So, you know, I'd say again, our pilot project feedback survey, it's a great comment to put in there if you would like, but I think it's hard too when you know, our neighborhood traffic calming program has over 165 requests across the city. And so it's like, how do you prioritize that? And how do you prioritize which schools and how? And so I think a lot of the planning efforts that we're doing, the recommendations from that, you know, there's going to be projects that rise to the top that say, you know, actually this area needs a lot of work. We've seen the most complaints here. There's a lot of speeding here. And I think that's too where, you know, as a transportation group, we want to get away from a lot of the reactive type of work that we're doing right now of we're waiting for residents to put in a request of, hey, there's an issue here, and then we go and do something, to looking at, hey, we're monitoring like the speeds across the city and we're monitoring where we're seeing issues. Let's go and do a project there. We're not there yet, but that's the goal in the future.
Is there anything our group can do to help you guys get like the word out, or is there anything we can do to help your mission?
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, the communications aspect is huge. So, you know, we're doing a lot through like our city channels, but, you know, obviously the more you can do to spread that across your own channels and to your own network is great. And then, you know, as an advisory board, your goal is to advise council. And so I'd say if this is something that you all feel is important and are passionate about, you know, is to bring that to council to say, hey, you should continue to fund this type of work in the future. So that's what I have right now. I'm sure there'll be other
That's
things.
great, yeah.
Where are those I think you said there were 4 protected bike lanes installed so far. Where are those at?
So they haven't been installed yet.
Okay.
So, and we get this question a lot, so it's Bellevue, Windermere, Pennsylvania, and Phillips. And yes, these are very small sections. We strategically chose these locations because either there's existing buffered bike lanes, which means that there is, you know, a bike lane is just a stripe on a street, right? A buffered bike lane means that there's, you know, a little more space between the actual bike lane and the travel lane, which allows you to put protection in that buffered space. So Bellevue, last year, we striped a buffered bike lane on. Windermere, I think, was striped back in 2021 maybe. And then, so those are like already ready to go. We just gotta install whatever protection we choose along there. Pennsylvania and Phillips, there's enough right of way where we can add a buffered bike lane to then add protection in. So we specifically chose these locations because 1, we're trying out different materials. So that's one of the things we're going to be asking in the pilot project survey is like, which type of material do you like more than the other? And we wanted to be able to do on corridors that we could easily, you know, go in and do right of way. It's not a lot of rework or grinding up existing striping or whatever it is. So, you know, the idea is that we're testing them out this year to then hopefully roll out in a larger fashion in future years, so. Any other questions?
Nope, I think we're good. Thank you, Kenna.
Thank you so much. And if you do have any other follow-up questions, you can, I think, go through them and yeah, let me know. I'm happy to chat more. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I would love to stay for this meeting, but I gotta go catch the end of the TMB meeting, so.
Thanks for joining us, Kenna.
Yes, thank you.
Circle back to, like we mentioned, public comment. I know when we first met, you weren't here, Pam, if you would like to speak for public comment, we can.
If you wanna let me,
Yeah,
well, thank you. I figured I'd use the big sign. These are one page. I'm Pam Chadbourne, I live a block from here, so you had, considering the merger of King Soopers, Kroger, and Safeway Albertson on your agenda tonight. And I think that's a great thing to consider. Interestingly, today there was a press release of which stores they're gonna sell, and to who, CNS grocers, Piggly Wiggly. So they claim, the Kroger folks claim that no one will lose their jobs and no stores will close. I'm gonna tell you, I'm pretty sure there's no guarantee, and what would we do if they did? They're going to fail or whatever based on, other factors, and I think that those are out of our control. I think they're under the control of these monopolies. They're increasingly becoming monopolies, and that's very bad for food. It is bad for the people, and it's also bad for our neighborhoods. I'm concerned about locations turning over and becoming something else. And so single stores becoming very crowded as groceries and degrading our quality of life. We need more study on this and more understanding of what would happen. Scenarios, these are what ifs. But thank you for considering this, because I think it's a very dangerous thing. The step that they're suggesting is not the last step. It's only the first one, and other stuff will happen. I was working in the LA area when 20-some years ago, when the major chains busted the unions in the groceries. It's not written about, it's not talked about. We're not dealing with this as a country. It's a terrible thing, but they did bust the unions. There's no deals. The original King Soopers was owned by Mr. King, and he took care of the employees, and the prices were cheaper. And they had a service counter where you could go and ask where things were. Now there's no service counters. The employees get no benefits almost. And it's a terrible place to work. And the prices are high. These are gouging entities that we need to control, not reward. The other thing I want to mention is concern about Littleton Boulevard and downtown. There's a project downtown. There's a Littleton Boulevard Economic Development Area. There's a Littleton Boulevard Economic Development Plan. There's only one city. There's only one Littleton Boulevard. I think we should have a trolley up and down there, and then TMB as proposed, bike and ped along Powers in the parallel area, and develop Powers to be friendly to those kinds of transit and have small neighborhood interactive businesses along Powers. And Littleton Boulevard being a historic overlay district with the trolley up and down to Main Street, historic Main Street up to Broadway. And the trolley to the light rail, first and last mile. We need to do better planning in the city design, and we're not doing it right now as a city. We need to do that, and we need people to demand that from our management. So thanks for your consideration.
this is a great segue into the next item on our discussion topic was drafting a letter opposing the Kroger Albertsons merger. And some questions about that like came to mind. It's like, who do we want this letter to be going to? Do I to just our city council? Do we want to send it to like I know the, not district attorney, but the attorney general for the state of Colorado has also filed a lawsuit opposing this merger, and like, basically, who would we want to send this letter to? And then how would we like to phrase and or word it? Does anyone have any particular feelings?
I think those are all great avenues to get that letter. If we could get city council on board, I think that'd be ideal, because obviously council is a more, you know, they are the overarching body within our city
Yeah.
government, right? They have more influence than our board.
Yes.
But even if just our board sends it, I think adding support to the attorney general is great, because that's a bigger stack of papers the attorney general can give to, you know, to a judge or a jury in a lawsuit and say, you know, these are all of the people who have expressed that this will harm their community. And I think that as far as content, just pointing out the negative effects for the people who work at the Safeway and King Soopers locations within our city, for consumers within our city. And I think one thing that comes to mind for me is, I think Littleton, you know, any municipality with King Soopers and or Safeway locations would be negatively affected by this. But Littleton, I think, stands to be uniquely negatively affected, because we have on Mineral Avenue, right at the intersection with Broadway, both kind of Safeway and a King Soopers next to each other. And even though they say they're gonna, you know, locations open, I find it hard to believe they would have these two right next to each other still open. So that's my thoughts as far as content. I think it'd be helpful, like, to see like how many people like support this idea on the board.
I'm sorry, I'm playing a little bit of catch up. Which company is taking over which company? Or are they just merging, or is Kroger taking over Albertsons, vice versa?
Yeah, Kroger, King Soopers is gonna buy Albertson slash Safeway, or merge in essence, but it'd be a purchase from that company. And they would be basically, so for that and like City Market and all would all fall under them as their sole owner, just basically rebranded.
My only thought, and this is just a thought, cause I agree, I think more competition
Yeah.
is better for
Yeah,
the people in general. But I pay a lot of attention to food quality, and Kroger does a better job than both of those other companies at bringing fresher produce and better food for people. So that's just a side note.
I think it's something we could, you know, bring to, you know, now that they're at the farmer's market. I went on Sunday, and it's awesome they're doing it, and I felt like it brought a ton of people downtown. But there was only like a half a street of vendors, and it was great, all the vendors were great, but it makes me concerned that, I'm kind of getting to a different topic. But my point was that that's where we should be kind of bringing this to people's attention, because I don't think people are talking about it, and people going to farmers markets are the ones that are actually concerned about fresh food and what they're putting into their bodies. And so maybe bring it there, if the people that have signed up to attend the farmers market bring this to people's attention.
Or maybe have it be a two-tiered letter where you're like, first of all, we don't want this merger to happen, but if it does, these are the things that our community cares about. That puts pressure on the company to follow through on certain promises. I don't know.
and would we want different letters sent to different folks, like one sent to the city council that's more focused on like opposing this? And then if we were to send one to like the AG of Colorado, have that more focused, like you said, like a two-tiered of, we don't want this. But and reemphasize the things that are important in our community, like fresh produce. And like making sure that people who are working there are like getting treated fairly and not being mistreated as employees in these like local grocery stores.
If the meat of the letters can be the same and maybe just the opening paragraph about what we
Yeah.
expect the different
Yeah.
institutions or people to do about it. But I think the meat of it should be along the same lines.
I'd be curious too what like local farmers and how they feel about it. Because you see a lot of local stuff actually in the grocery, more and more in the grocery store, like Gotham Green. I don't know, there's a few others. Rebel Farms.
I will farm it now.
I've never been a farmer, but I can't imagine they would support a merger just since it would be fewer options to sell their produce to. I think kind of going off your point is like, couldn't make the main, like, different body paragraphs with the different negative ramifications and remain those the same. And then, as you said, change up just the intro. Outro paragraphs.
And would anyone be interested in being on a subcommittee to kind of draft these letters so that we can like have something hopefully at our August meeting to actually talk about, look at, and see if we want to tweak a little bit before sending them off to the city councilor and whoever we want to.
I should note, so I've done a little bit of research on this too, and timeline is gonna be a critical piece. You noted that the state attorney general has filed a suit to challenge it. The hearings for that are taking place on August 12th.
Okay.
It's being challenged in other states across the country as well, and the FTC has filed a suit at the federal level that's being heard in Portland, Oregon on August 26th. So for a letter to have, I would imagine for a letter to have some kind of impact, it would have to be drafted and submitted.
Yes. That was my hope, to have a subcommittee draft it, and then by the end of our next meeting, we can have it prepared to send out, because it should.
Also, well, and also to be fair, involving council in this would add some other time to it as well.
Oh, yes, that's fair.
They can't really take very many kinds of action outside of a public meeting, and that's happened at certain kinds. So the odds, based on the timeline, the odds of getting
Oh, I
signatory
mean, yes.
are not very good. But it could come from this body. I believe we want to double check with our folks in the city administration team, but at the very least, if it's an interest of the members of this group, you all certainly could write individually under your own names as citizens of Colorado and citizens of the US. There's some options that are probably more graspable than getting a formal letter from city council.
I think with that in mind, let's focus then on just doing it from our board, and as you
Yeah.
said, having the subcommittee draft it, and then we could, I guess, vote and approve it on our next meeting.
Which is August 1st.
Yes.
You said it was the 12th?
Yes, in the Denver State Court, it's August 12th, and the federal court is in Portland on the 26th.
I would offer, I'm gonna be out of town shortly for a while and won't be at the next meeting, so I will not be helpful, but I
No
would
worries.
like to be.
I definitely would be interested in helping draft said letter and getting stuff ready.
I'd be interested in, like, doing a couple paragraphs of that as well.
Okay. Sweet. I don't expect it to be something like multiple pages, like relatively short, sweet, to the point.
Right, I think like, probably around 2 pages long.
Yeah.
So.
Sweet. Does anyone else have any comments or thoughts on that? I've noted down a lot of what people said on their thoughts, and ideas on what should be included and how we should kind of structure it. Does anyone have anything else they want to add before we move on to our next topic?
Probably just last request would be just, as you two draft the letter before we review it, think about the larger impacts outside. There's like the city of Littleton. I like the point of like the agricultural impact.
Yeah.
And then, seeing what the greater impact is. So I think as long as we can kind of zoom in and out throughout that letter, I think that'll make a big impact.
Also emphasize the specific next generation element of the issue as well. I believe King Super, the primary demographic of their employees, like 45% of King Super's employees fall between the 20 to 30 age group. So that's a great opportunity, given the nature and scope of this board, to really hammer home on that particular issue especially. So another point for consideration.
So no one else has any more comments? We'll go on to, I believe, the next topic is discussing the NGAP presence at upcoming city events. I know it was something we kind of talked about briefly at our last meeting was, do we want to show up at different city events, whether it's meet, greet, and eats or little jam concerts and things like that? And just figure out like what level of invested do we want to be, or do we even still want to do that? Because I know we talked about it. I'm not sure if all y'all received, I sent out an email with like a sign up sheet I had made. But basically those are all the different events and kind of the different dates and times they were. And I've talked with Chris that we can get resources from the city, whether it's tables, banners, flyers to hand out. It's just, we have to figure out if we want to be there and make that commitment as a board to be there at some of those events.
So just is the intention behind us going to get feedback of what people want to see change in the city, or spread the word of like what our board is and what events we're having? Like, what is the intention?
Kind of both, a little bit at this point, a little bit more, I think, education of who we are, and then also like telling people about Matt's on Main and just kind of like putting us out in front of people, because I feel like most people in the city don't even know that we exist. So I was like kind of just like being a friendly face out there, explaining who we are, what we're doing, and more of an education and information about our upcoming event. That's where I'm hoping we'll focus more on capturing data and input from citizens on what they want us to do.
No, I think that makes a lot of sense. I'm down to go to a couple events for sure.
Okay.
I'll sign up on I saw your sheet.
Yeah.
I saw your sheet.
Yeah. But yeah, and then I'll work with Chris to figure out what particular resources we can get from the city. We already kind of had an ongoing discussion. We just need to figure out. Did we ever find if there were any flyers ahead? Because I think they've been previously made by previous like NGACs at that point, but I could not find anything on the city website.
Yeah, probably. You might want to reach out to Carla or someone like that.
Okay.
Specifics in that regard, but it's probably possible. Yeah, so let's get you guys those resources in a timely manner.
And I guess another like follow-up to that, is there like a timeline we want to set? Like hopefully maybe everyone can by the end of this week look at their calendars if they want to go to any of the events, just so I can figure out which one we're gonna have a presence at and which ones I need to make sure that people have resources and supplies to like go be a part of. So if folks, yeah, by the end of this week could take a look, that'd be great. And then our last discussion topic is actually Matt's on Main, and what kind of just an update of where different subcommittees are and what we think we need to move towards and work on, especially as we're approaching August. I know it's not till towards the end of August, but I want to make sure we have as many of our ducks in a row, so we're not scrambling throughout the entire month of August to try and get everything done.
So Jack and I met and kind of narrowed down on the just marketing collateral, and I think did you show them at the last meeting?
Yeah, so I think I showed some of the
You're totally fine, I have it all mine. But I think, so I sent social media collateral, to David Gilbert. And then I also sent like a PDF flyer to him, and I'm waiting to hear back, so I'll follow up with him, this week. But I know we've all discussed, like having flyers that we can put in coffee shops and storefront windows. I know we gotta, I guess I'm confused on what is the budget for that, what printer does Littleton use? I'm happy to do it, I just don't know who to contact and that sort of thing, and how much money we have to actually spend on print, or if we even have money, or if we should focus more on digital marketing efforts.
We should be able to use, at least from my understanding in the past, the city's resources when it comes to printing. So basically, I don't know if it's David or whoever we need to reach out to, but the city should be able to provide all the printing we need for us.
Depending on the size of the print job, we could work with our creative services team.
Okay. Who do I reach out for? Is David Gilbert the?
David would be a great place to start.
Okay.
Carl Max.
Carla and David are probably gonna be your top two contacts for that information.
Okay. Can someone send me Carla's email?
I can.
Okay, that'd be
We
awesome.
can connect you.
That'd be awesome.
Could you also send me Carla's information for the just general NGAB information?
Sure. Yeah, I can send you guys an entire email.
Awesome.
And then, oh, sorry.
That's one of the things we're here to do.
Yeah.
And then, I know Mackenzie and I are planning on sending out, we'll post it on our business social media, and we're planning on sending it out to our email list. But I think everyone has an email list, everyone has Facebook or something, and so I think all of us individually should be sure to, and so I'll email out all the social media collateral to everyone individually. And if everyone can just kind of post it or email it or text it to your family, friends, people in Denver that we want to make aware of how cool Littleton is, I think that would be super helpful. Jack and I talked about, reaching out to influencers. We can have influencers at the event, filming and just posting stuff, so we have a pretty solid list of those people we're gonna reach out to. Just trying to get this. But I don't know, do you have anything else to add for our?
I think you summed it up pretty well. Yeah, we got the final draft poster.
Wait, that's not the final, oh yeah, it is, that has there was a lot of iterations, but that's like for Instagram stories, and then I have an Instagram post, and then I just have a PDF that we can print out, so.
The one other thing was the Littleton report. You emailed the Littleton report.
I emailed David Gilbert, is there?
David Gilbert, right.
Yes, and I just need to follow up with him because I haven't heard back.
Gotcha.
But yeah, I sent him all the things, but I don't know, so for the Littleton report, is David gonna send parameters of like what that marketing?
I would presume so.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, well, then I'll keep bugging him.
Perfect.
I got a list from Ellen of, different emails of companies in downtown Littleton. Need to follow up with them and do some door knocking, because I don't know if everyone is gonna be super responsive to email. But just to see how we can get some other businesses involved. It does sound like there's a good chance Pliables, and Skin Essentials might wanna do something, maybe Dan May with Lavaca. So you just need to figure out if that's gonna be like a lottery thing, samples, a sale, whatever they are willing to do. But obviously I have some more people to reach out to. And I'll
Yeah, it's
tell
like,
you who, and maybe I tell you who I'm reaching out to, and then you can
Yeah, cause I've been talking with some folks from Littleton Business Chamber and I was like, I'm gonna send an official request sometime this week.
I also think it makes sense to reach out to the different groups that have come to our meetings. Like Kenna today and just the bike
Yeah,
and have them
Vibrant
there.
Littleton, yeah.
Yeah, so it just can be really collaborative and people can get as much information about what. So I think that's so much of the problem is people don't know where their money's being spent, and I think having as many people around as possible to show all the work that's been going into making Littleton what it is important.
Andrew, were you able to confirm whether or not we'd be able to get like a little stage kind of deal for them to instruct?
I've not gotten any more information. Do you know if the city has any update on that, Chris?
The library and the museum have collapsible stages. I believe the libraries is available that day. We would just have to look into logistics of transporting it and setting it up.
Okay, and then this similarly of like an AV system, is there something that could be borrowed for the instructor?
LA Physique has
Oh, okay, never mind then.
speakers. That, so. And then I do think if there's people you follow, like Colorado Instagram accounts or whatever, putting them in the loop and having them spread the word, that's how we're gonna get people outside of Littleton to come. And I know that's part of our goal is to see, you know, draw some different attention to Littleton and show what an awesome place it is to live, so.
I can also make sure that all this gets, I'm imagining Robert has been relaying this, but gets passed on to the city council too, cause I know a lot of them have a lot of community involvement and stuff, and would be great resources to let them know in advance. Not only for their presence, but the folks that they know in the city.
The last part, survey is completed. Cody is reviewing it right now to see if there's any kind of last minute additions. Right now, we have a total of 20 items that are all gonna be easy, just click, 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 or tick the box, so that way it'll take 3 minutes. If your pen's not working, that's the hope. So we'll gather some demographic information. We'll try to better understand, what type of events people are interested in attending, a little bit of information about who we are as a board, how to get in touch with us, kind of just get that feedback, of what residents or non-residents would like us to better support within Littleton, just to get our name out. So it also will support our presence at other events. So that way, as word of mouth kind of goes, they know who to look for, what we're about, and then just keep collecting that feedback. Because there's some open-ended items in there that I think, you know, as we attend different events, we'll get different answers that we can. This. And then, as always, future interests of what other things would you like to see Littleton do that we can help support. Hopefully we'll have that finalized by the 15th is our deadline. And then from there, get a QR code and then work with some of our resources to get those ready for events.
That could be a good thing to add on the social media stuff too, or on the printed flyers is a QR code.
Yeah.
We're gonna put it up around town.
Something else, if we could have a table, we could get like Lavaca or Skin Essentials, Sugar, whoever to do a basket where people can, if they fill out the survey and they put it in with their name, we pull a card and they win the prize. Something.
I like that idea.
Chocolate Therapist has done, I don't know if they do it this time, but they've done gift baskets before for other things.
Yeah, they've done for some of our.
I know, so that we should reach
So
out
we
to
can
them.
get a few.
Yeah, if that's an option, want to participate in, then.
Is there anything else anyone has regarding our Mats on Main that we want to make sure we don't forget, or just other stuff that's not within the scope of the 3 subcommittees?
I think we need to start advertising by beginning of August and.
One thing, I just came to mind is, the actual street closure. Do we have approval yet for that?
I know the Town Hall Arts Center has already like gotten their approval, we just would need an extension. But I'm not
And
sure.
I think Robert was taking care of that, cause I think that's why we picked the date we picked was because it was already gonna be shut down and we were just kind of piggybacking off the front end of it.
Yeah. Is there some, Chris, do you know of who in the city we might wanna follow up with to make sure that actually happens before we get too close to the event?
I would say I could probably check in with Mike, but you seems to, you have any recommendations for me? I think I reached out to.
No, I think that we'll take that one and we'll confirm it.
Yeah, okay, all right.
And kind of like based off what you said, Mackenzie, I was thinking we would have a table for us and hopefully maybe an awning or something that we can get from the city. But is there anything else we think we'd need besides the stage, hopefully from the library?
Extra, like a water cooler or something like that, that might be nice. I mean, it's a pretty straightforward event. I think that's why we chose it. People are gonna bring their own mats. They're gonna bring, you know, I think the flyer says, bring your mat and water, and they're gonna set up, and Ballet Physique is gonna kind of handle the rest. It's just how much we wanna get the rest of the community involved.
Okay.
How we can support that, so.
Yeah. That's what, August 24th, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, sweet. Sorry. No one has anything else on that, we can move to our comments and reports section. Does any of the city staff have anything you guys want to add or share?
No report on my behalf this week.
Awesome. Our council liaison is not present, so we'll just move along to the board. I don't really have anything except for, again, if you guys have any topics or things you want to discuss, please always let me know. I'm always going to try and find different areas of the city that I think, and especially once we get more feedback and more direction to like have us present on, and then see if there's things that we want to advocate or work for on top of that. It's like similarly with what we heard Safer Streets tonight, like my thought is let that digest a little bit and then have a rediscussion of that next month and figure out, are there any action steps or things we want to take? Do we want to write letters in support of either whether it's like Project Zero or just a Safer Streets initiative, or like you said, Mackenzie encouraged the city council to focus on particular areas and not just try and cover everything, but just give time for that this summer, because we just heard the presentation tonight, and then readdress it and figure out what action steps we want to take. That's at least my hope, is kind of like, hear something, then decide the next meeting if we want to take action steps and what that would look like. But again, if there's any topics or things you particularly want to hear, please let me know. Me and Chris can get it scheduled so those representatives from the city or whatever organizations can come present. That's all I have.
Absolutely.
And then Vice Chair, do you have anything?
Yeah, so I guess, I just feel like, we're doing a good job, with this meeting with both of our, I guess, two main focuses in terms of Matt's on Main with public outreach, and then with the Kroger Albertsons letter and meeting with Safer Streets in terms of the actual, policy that affects our city. So I think, continue with more stuff like that. The other thing that, I wanted to mention is following up from our last month's meeting. I mentioned during my report section is RTD considering changing bus zero, which runs along South Broadway. Right now it runs basically the whole length of Broadway from Union Station downtown Denver down to the Highlands Ranch Town Center. And their September changes, they are proposing changing it to be, now the old route 0 just truncating in Inglewood and the new one doing the same route but from Inglewood to Highlands Ranch through Littleton. What I was concerned about was a reduction in service. I reached out to both of Littleton's RTD board directors. So basically there's Director Bobby Dishel, who represents Northern Littleton, and Doug Tisdale, Southern Littleton. I did not get a response from board member Tisdale, but board member Dishel responded to me and he said that that change would not come with any reduction in transit service to Littleton, which I'm very pleased with, that that change won't reduce our transit service, hopefully could increase on-time performance, so. Just wanted to follow up that from last month, but that's all I have.
Awesome. And then do any other members of the board have any comments or reports to make? Awesome, then I will adjourn our meeting.